At 0417 hours on December 19th, 1944, Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski crouched beside a Sherman tank in a frozen maintenance tent outside Bastogne, Belgium, listening to metal scream as it died. The temperature was minus 16 degrees Celsius. The tank's engine block was cracking. Hairline fractures spider-webbed across cast iron as frozen coolant expanded inside the cooling passages. Each fracture sounded like a gunshot. Sharp, final, irreversible. Kowalski pressed his bare hand against the engine block. The metal felt like it would strip skin. He could feel the vibration of destruction through his palm. 30 tons of armor, 75mm gun, 500 horsepower engine. Completely useless because water froze at 0 degrees, and the army's coolant mixture froze at minus 12. The temperature outside was minus 16. The coolant had been solid ice for 4 hours. This was the third Sherman to die that night. 15th that week. 61st since December 16th. 3rd Armoured Division had started the Battle of the Bulge with 142 tanks. As of 0417 on December 19th, they had 41 operational. Not because of German guns, because of chemistry. The smell in the maintenance tent was a mixture of motor oil, frozen metal, and desperation. 6 mechanics worked under electric lights powered by a generator that coughed black smoke into the winter air. Their breath formed white clouds. Their hands were wrapped in rags because regulation gloves were not thick enough for minus 16-degree work. The canvas tent walls snapped in the wind. Cold air leaked through every seam. Another crack echoed through the tent. The engine block split wider. Kowalski watched coolant solid green ice push through the fracture. When coolant froze, it expanded by approximately 9%. Cast iron could not accommodate that expansion. The result was catastrophic structural failure. A cracked engine block could not be repaired in field conditions. Required complete engine replacement. Required depot-level maintenance facilities back in England or France. Required equipment 3rd Armoured did not have in Belgium. A Sherman with a cracked block was 30 tons of immobile steel. Useless. The Battle of the Bulge had begun 3 days earlier. December 16th, 1944. 0530 hours. German artillery opened fire along an 80-mile front in the Ardennes forest. 1,800 guns. 90 minutes of sustained bombardment. When the shelling stopped, German armor rolled forward through morning fog. 200,000 troops, 6 panzer divisions. The largest German offensive since 1940. Hitler's plan was simple and desperate. Punch through Allied lines. Drive northwest to Antwerp. Capture the port. Split British and American forces. Force negotiated peace before Soviet armies reached Berlin from the east. The offensive was Germany's last strategic gamble. Everything depended on speed. Everything depended on capturing key road junctions before American reinforcements arrived. Bastogne sat at one of those junctions. 7 highways converged on the town. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled movement through the Ardennes. The Wehrmacht needed it. The Allies needed to hold it. 3rd Armoured Division received emergency orders at 1300 hours December 16th. Move to Bastogne. Establish defensive positions. Hold at all costs. They moved fast. 142 tanks covering 60 miles in 18 hours. Reached Bastogne at 0700 December 17th. Established a 15-mile defensive perimeter. Prepared for German assault. Then the temperature dropped. December 17th. Daytime high, minus 4 degrees Celsius. Nighttime low, minus 14. December 18th. Daytime high, minus 6. Nighttime low, minus 18. December 19th. Nighttime low, minus 21, predicted. The coldest December in Belgian recorded history. Meteorologists would later confirm it was the coldest European winter since 1895. Standard Army coolant mixture was 50% ethylene glycol, 50% water. The mixture was designed for European winter operations. Specified in Field Manual 3-20, Section 4, Paragraph 12. Technical specifications claimed it prevented freezing to -12 degrees Celsius. Every maintenance depot used the same formula. Every Sherman tank carried the same coolant. Every technical manual cited the same numbers. The specifications were wrong. At -13 degrees, the coolant mixture began forming ice crystals. At -15, it became slush. At -18, it froze completely solid. When coolant froze, it expanded. When it expanded inside sealed cooling passages, pressure built against cast iron walls. When pressure exceeded the tensile strength of cast iron, approximately 25,000 pounds per square inch, the engine block cracked. Physics did not care about Army specifications. By December 18th, 3rd Armoured had lost 54 tanks to cooling system failures. 54 engines cracked by ice. 54 crews sitting in immobilized steel boxes watching German armour manoeuvre around them. The German tanks kept running. The Wehrmacht had been fighting in Russian winter since 1941. 3 years of -30-degree operations. They understood cold weather. Their cooling systems used methanol-based compounds that remained liquid to -30 degrees. German tankers did not lose equipment to freezing. American tankers did. The mathematics were catastrophic. 3rd Armoured was losing 8 tanks per day to ice. At that rate, they would have 0 operational armour by December 22nd. 4 days. The Germans were bringing an estimated 3 panzer divisions toward Bastogne. Intelligence reports suggested 300 tanks. If 3rd Armoured had 0 tanks by December 22nd, German armour would punch through the defensive line. Bastogne would fall. The road junction would open. German forces would spread across Belgium. Estimated casualties, 10,000 Allied soldiers. All because water froze at 0 degrees. Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski was 32 years old, 5'9", 160 pounds. Born in Cleveland, Ohio, to Polish immigrants who came through Ellis Island in 1911. His father, Joseph, worked the steel mills on the Cuyahoga River, 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Came home every night covered in soot and metal dust. His mother, Anna, cleaned houses for wealthy families in Shaker Heights. Raymond was the oldest of 4 children. He learned early that survival required understanding how things worked. He attended 2 years of community college, studied chemistry, could not afford to continue after his father was injured in a mill accident in 1933, needed to work, needed to support the family, got a job at Standard Oil Refinery in Cleveland, started as a general laborer, hauling equipment, cleaning tanks, learning by watching. The engineers at Standard Oil noticed him within 6 months. Noticed he asked intelligent questions about petroleum processing. Noticed he understood fluid dynamics better than men with engineering degrees. Noticed he could calculate viscosity and boiling points in his head. By 1935, Kowalski was working in the coolant formulation department, creating specialized coolant mixtures for industrial engines. Engines that operated in extreme temperatures. Engines in Arctic oil fields. Engines in desert mining operations. Engines that could not afford to fail. He understood freezing point depression, understood colligative properties, understood that adding certain compounds to water lowered its freezing temperature in predictable ways, understood that the right mixture of alcohols, glycols, and salts could keep liquid coolant flowing at -40 degrees. It was basic molecular chemistry. It was his job for 6 years. Then Pearl Harbor happened. December 7th, 1941. Raymond Kowalski enlisted in the United States Army on January 12, 1942, 29 years old, single, no dependents. He told the recruiting sergeant he worked with engines. The sergeant wrote down mechanic and assigned him to armor. The Army made him a tank mechanic, sent him to Fort Knox for training, taught him Sherman engine repair, taught him track maintenance, taught him field procedures, never asked what he did at Standard Oil, never asked about chemistry knowledge, just taught him to follow technical manuals and fix tanks according to Army specifications. Kowalski tried explaining during basic training. Told his training sergeant he understood coolant chemistry. Told him the army coolant mixture would fail in extreme cold. Showed calculations proving the 50-50 ethylene glycol mixture would freeze at -13 degrees, not -12, as specifications claimed. The training sergeant told him the army did not need calculations from enlisted men. Told him technical manuals were written by engineers with college degrees. Told him to shut up and follow procedures. Kowalski followed procedures for 22 months. Arrived in Europe in June 1943. Assigned to 3rd Armoured Division. Worked as battalion mechanic. Fixed engines. Maintained cooling systems. Watched tanks break down from problems he knew how to prevent. Watched officers blame equipment failure when the real problem was chemistry. Watched mechanics replace engine blocks when the real solution was reformulating coolant. He tried mentioning it twice more. July 1943, wrote a memo to battalion maintenance officer suggesting coolant modification for winter operations. Memo was filed and ignored. December 1943, verbally. Suggested to company commander that methanol additives would prevent freezing. Commander told him unauthorized modifications violated regulations. Told him to stick to approved procedures. So Kowalski stuck to approved procedures. Fixed what he could fix. Watched what he could not prevent. Kept his chemistry knowledge to himself. Until December 19, 1944, when approved procedures meant watching his third engine block crack in one night. Major Frank Hastings walked into the maintenance tent at 0430 hours, 38 years old, West Point class of 1928, 16 years in armor. Company commander in Louisiana maneuvers. Battalion commander in North Africa. Promoted to major after Sicily campaign. He understood tactics, understood logistics, understood that his battalion was dying from cold faster than from German guns. Hastings had started December 16th with 32 Sherman tanks. As of 0430 December 19th, he had 14 operational, 18 lost to ice. He was supposed to defend a 3-mile section of defensive perimeter, 3 miles against German armor, 14 tanks. The mathematics did not work. He found Kowalski crouched beside the dead Sherman. Kowalski's hands were black with grease, his face was grey with exhaustion. He had been awake for 38 hours. He was staring at the cracked engine block like it was a personal insult. "How many more tonight?" Hastings asked. Kowalski did not look up. 3 more, maybe 4, depends on wind, depends on how fast temperature drops. How many operational tanks will I have by morning? 11, maybe 10. Hastings calculated in his head. 10 tanks, 3 miles of line. German intelligence reported 2 panzer divisions maneuvering toward Bastogne from the northeast. Estimated 120 tanks. 10 American tanks against 120 German. With those odds, 2nd Battalion would not survive 6 hours once the Germans attacked in force. "Is there anything we can do?" Hastings asked. "Anything at all to stop the freezing?" Kowalski finally looked up. His eyes were red from chemical fumes and lack of sleep. He looked at Hastings and saw an officer desperate enough to actually listen. "Yes, sir," Kowalski said. "I can reformulate the coolant." "Reformulate it how?" "Change the mixture. Add methanol. Add glycerol. Add salt in specific ratios. Lower the freezing point to -30 degrees. Maybe -35 if I calculate the ratios correctly." Hastings stared at him. "You know how to do that?" "Yes, sir. I did it for 3 years at Standard Oil. Formulated coolants for industrial engines operating in extreme temperatures. Arctic operations. This is basic colligative chemistry. The army mixture is wrong. Wrong ratios. Wrong compounds. I can fix it." "How long would it take?" 6 hours. Maybe 7. Need to mix approximately 200 gallons per tank. 11 tanks if we lose 3 more. Tonight. 2,200 gallons total. Can source methanol from fuel additives in the supply depot. Glycerol from medical supplies. Salt from the mess unit. Mix everything by hand. Calculate ratios. Test for separation. Fill the tanks before dawn. Hastings was an armor officer, not a chemist. He did not understand molecular weights or colligative properties, but he understood numbers, understood that doing nothing meant losing all his tanks by December 21st, understood that unauthorized coolant modification could result in court-martial for the mechanic who mixed it and the officer who authorized it, understood that losing Bastogne could cost thousands of American lives. "Is it safe?" Hastings asked. "Will it damage the engines?" "Not if I calculate ratios correctly," Kowalski said. "Methanol is more volatile than ethylene glycol. Need to adjust mixture concentration to prevent vapor lock at operating temperature. Glycerol increases viscosity. Need to compensate with proper water ratio. Salt provides additional freezing point depression, but increases corrosion potential over time. Need to balance everything. It is complicated. But it works. What happens if you calculate wrong? Engines could overheat, could develop vapor lock, could corrode cooling passages, could fail within hours or days. What happens if we do nothing? Kowalski gestured at the cracked engine block. The fractures had spread through the entire cast iron structure. The engine was completely destroyed. This happens to every tank. You will have zero operational armor by December 22nd. Germans punch through the line. Bastogne falls. Maybe 10,000 casualties. Hastings looked at the destroyed engine, looked at Kowalski's exhausted face, made his decision. "Do it," Hastings said. "I will authorize the modification. If it works, I will take credit. If it fails, I will take responsibility. Court-martial me if necessary. Either way, we are dead, without operational tanks." Kowalski stood, wiped grease from his hands onto his coveralls. His fingers were numb despite the work gloves. "I will need help. Need 3 men who can follow instructions. Need access to supply depot. Need authorization to requisition materials without questions. You will have whatever you need. How confident are you this will work?" Kowalski looked at the frozen maintenance tent, looked at the 6 dead Shermans waiting for engine replacements that would never come, looked at Major Hastings. 90% confident the chemistry is correct. 10% worried I missed something in the calculations. But I am 100% certain that doing nothing guarantees failure. Hastings nodded once. "Good enough. Get started." At 04:38 hours on December 19th, 1944, Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski began the most important chemistry experiment of the war. He had 6 hours until dawn. 11 tanks that needed to survive. 2,200 gallons of coolant to formulate. Zero margin for error. If his calculations were right, 2nd Battalion would hold the defensive line. If his calculations were wrong, Bastogne would fall and thousands would die. Either way, nobody would ever put his name in any official report. At 04:45 hours, December 19th, 1944, Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski stood in the supply depot with a requisition list that violated 6 Army regulations. He needed methanol, needed glycerol, needed salt, needed them immediately, needed them without questions. The supply depot was a Quonset hut, half buried in snow. Inside, Captain Lawrence Morrison sat behind a desk made from ammunition crates. 41 years old. Supply Corps. 8 months in Europe. Never seen combat. His job was inventory control. His job was making sure requisitions matched authorization codes. His job was following procedures. Kowalski handed him the requisition form. Morrison read it, frowned. 1855-gallon drums of methanol fuel additive. Morrison looked up. "What do you need methanol for?" "Tank maintenance," Kowalski said. "Emergency modification." "What kind of modification requires 990 gallons of methanol?" "Coolant reformulation." "Need it within the hour." Morrison shook his head. "This requisition is not properly authorized. Needs signature from Division Quartermaster. Needs explanation of purpose. Needs—" The tent flap opened. Major Frank Hastings entered. Snow covered his shoulders. His breath formed white clouds in the cold air. "The requisition is authorized," Hastings said. "I am authorizing it. Sign the form." Morrison stood. "Sir, regulations require my battalion to hold 3 miles of defensive line with tanks that work." Hastings interrupted. "Sign the form. Now." Morrison signed. Kowalski took 3 mechanics: Corporal José Martinez, Corporal David Chen, Corporal Robert Williams, started loading drums onto a 6x6 truck. 18 drums of methanol. Each drum weighed approximately 550 pounds when full. The 4 men worked in -18-degree cold. Their hands went numb despite gloves. The metal drum surfaces were cold enough to freeze exposed skin on contact. Martinez was from El Paso, Texas. 23 years old. Mechanic apprentice. Could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded. Chen was from San Francisco, 21 years old. Engineering student before the war. Understood mechanical systems. Williams was from Philadelphia, 26 years old. Worked construction before enlisting. Strong back. Good with tools. None of them understood chemistry. Kowalski would teach them. They loaded the methanol. Moved to medical supplies. Found 40 gallons of pharmaceutical-grade glycerol stored in 10-gallon containers. Glycerol was used for wound treatment, for preventing frostbite. The medical supply sergeant protested. Said glycerol was for casualties. Hastings showed the sergeant the requisition form with Morrison's signature. The sergeant handed over the glycerol. Final stop. Mess unit. 200 pounds of sodium chloride. Table salt. The mess sergeant did not ask questions, just gave them 4 50-pound sacks and told them to get out of his kitchen. They loaded everything onto the truck, drove back to the maintenance tent at 05:30 hours, unloaded in darkness. Set up a workspace using portable mixing tanks designed for fuel storage. No proper laboratory equipment. No graduated cylinders. No precision measuring tools. Just 55-gallon drums, hand pumps, stirring paddles, and a flashlight. Kowalski pulled out a notebook. Started calculating. The chemistry was straightforward in theory, complex in execution. Freezing point depression followed predictable laws. When you dissolved a substance in a liquid, the freezing point of that liquid decreased. The amount of decrease depended on the molecular weight of the dissolved substance and its concentration. This was called colligative properties. Basic physical chemistry. Water froze at 0 degrees Celsius. Add ethylene glycol, molecular weight 62, and the freezing point dropped. The standard army mixture was 50% ethylene glycol, 50% water. That mixture should freeze at approximately -12 degrees, but the specifications were wrong. The mixture actually froze at -13 degrees under laboratory conditions. In field conditions with impurities and thermal cycling, it froze at -11. Kowalski needed -35-degree protection, required more aggressive freezing point depression, required multiple compounds working together, required what chemists called a eutectic mixture, a combination that remained liquid at the lowest possible temperature. He wrote down the formula he had been calculating in his head for 3 days. 40% ethylene glycol. Base antifreeze. Molecular weight 62. Primary freezing point depression. 25% methanol. Molecular weight 32. Aggressive freezing point depression, but volatile. Boiling point only 65 degrees Celsius. Problem. Sherman engines operated at 85 to 95 degrees Celsius. If methanol concentration was too high, it would boil in the cooling system, create vapor bubbles, block coolant flow. Engine would overheat, engine would seize. 15% glycerol. Molecular weight 92. Secondary antifreeze. Also increased viscosity, made the mixture thicker, helped stabilize methanol, prevented separation. But if concentration was too high, coolant would not flow properly through narrow passages, pump would strain, circulation would fail. 18% water, universal solvent, necessary for mixture stability. also contributed to freezing point depression through colligative properties when other compounds were dissolved in it. 2% sodium chloride. Solution. Molecular weight 58.4. Modified eutectic point. Lowered freezing temperature of entire mixture, but increased corrosion potential. Salt dissolved aluminum. Sherman cooling systems used aluminum water pumps. Too much salt would destroy pumps within weeks. The total had to equal 100%. The ratios had to balance multiple competing requirements. Too much methanol meant vapor lock. Too little methanol meant inadequate freeze protection. Too much glycerol meant poor flow. Too little glycerol meant mixture instability. Salt provided the final freezing point depression but created long-term corrosion problems. Kowalski checked his calculations 3 times. The mixture should freeze at -32 degrees Celsius. Not -35 as he originally hoped, but -32 was adequate. The methanol concentration was low enough that vapor lock should not occur in pressurized cooling systems. Sherman tanks used pressurized systems. Pressure raised boiling points. 7 pounds per square inch of pressure raised water's boiling point to approximately 108 degrees Celsius. That pressure would raise methanol's effective boiling point to approximately 82 degrees Celsius, still lower than operating temperature. But the methanol was diluted to 25%. Mixed with other compounds. Should work, not guaranteed to work. Should work based on molecular chemistry and thermodynamics. Should work if his calculations were correct. Should work if he did not miss some interaction between compounds. Should work if field conditions matched laboratory theory. 90% confident. 10% terrified. He looked at Martinez, Chen, Williams. 3 mechanics waiting for instructions. We are going to mix 2,200 gallons of coolant. The mixture is precise. The ratios matter. If we get the ratios wrong, engines will fail. If engines fail, men die. Nodded. We have no measuring equipment, Kowalski continued. We will measure by volume using marked containers. We will mix in small batches, 55 gallons per batch, 40 batches total. Each batch takes approximately 15 minutes to mix properly. That is 10 hours of work. We have 5 hours until dawn. We work fast. We work carefully. Questions? Williams raised his hand. What happens if we mix it wrong? Vapor lock, Kowalski said, or viscosity problems, or freezing despite modification, or corrosion damage, or all of those simultaneously. What happens if we do nothing? Every tank freezes solid by December 22nd. Germans break through. We lose Bastogne. Williams nodded. Let us mix coolant. They started at 05:45 hours. The process was manual labor. Brutal manual labor in -18-degree cold inside a canvas tent that did not hold heat. First step. Measure ethylene glycol. They used the standard army coolant stock. 300 gallons remained in the supply depot. They needed 880 gallons for 40% concentration across 2,200 total gallons. Short by 580 gallons. Kowalski recalculated. Adjusted the formula to 35% ethylene glycol. Increased methanol to 28%. Adjusted water to 20%. Checked freezing point calculations. Still -30 degrees protection. Acceptable. Second step. Add methanol. The methanol came in 55-gallon drums. The liquid was clear, smelled like alcohol, volatile, dangerous. Methanol vapor was toxic. Breathing too much caused blindness, caused death. They worked with tent flaps open despite the cold. Needed ventilation, needed to breathe. Martinez pumped methanol from drums into mixing tanks using a hand pump. One stroke of the pump moved approximately 1 quart. 55 gallons equals 220 quarts. 220 pump strokes per drum. Martinez's arms burned after the 3rd drum. Kept pumping. 3rd step. Add glycerol. Thick. Viscous. Poured like honey in cold weather. Actually thicker than honey at -18 degrees. Chen used a stirring paddle to work the glycerol into the mixture. The glycerol resisted mixing, formed globules, required aggressive stirring for 5 minutes per batch until it finally dissolved into the ethylene glycol methanol base. Fourth step, add water. Standard water from the depot. Cold but not frozen because it was stored indoors. Williams added water slowly, watched for precipitation, watched for separation. The mixture remained homogeneous. Good sign. Fifth step, dissolve salt. Kowalski prepared salt solution separately. 10 pounds of salt per 55-gallon batch. Mixed salt with hot water in a separate container until fully dissolved. Then added the salt solution to the main mixture. Stirred for 2 minutes. The salt water integrated smoothly. Mixture remained clear. No crystallization. No precipitation. The first batch took 28 minutes. Too slow. They needed to complete 40 batches in 5 hours. 28 minutes per batch meant 18 hours total. Unacceptable. Kowalski streamlined the process. Set up production line. Martinez pumped methanol. Chen mixed glycerol and ethylene glycol simultaneously. Williams prepared salt solution. Kowalski added water and performed final mixing. Assembly line chemistry. Second batch, 18 minutes. Better. Third batch, 15 minutes. Acceptable. Fourth batch, 13 minutes. They found rhythm. By 0700 hours, they had mixed 10 batches, 550 gallons, 1/4 of total requirement. 2.5 hours elapsed. 2.5 hours remaining until 0930 when German attacks typically began. The work was exhausting. Martinez's arms were numb from pumping. Chen's shoulders ached from stirring. Williams's hands were covered in salt residue that burned when it contacted small cuts. Kowalski's head pounded from methanol fumes despite ventilation. They kept working. The physical toll increased. Martinez vomited at 0730 hours. Methanol exposure. Too much vapor inhalation. He vomited twice. Dry heaves. Nothing in his stomach. He had not eaten since 0600 the previous morning. 26 hours. He wiped his mouth, went back to pumping methanol. Chen's hands were shaking by 0800 hours. Not from cold. From exhaustion. He had been on maintenance duty for 40 hours straight. No sleep. No rest. Just work. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold the stirring paddle. He held it anyway. Kept mixing. Williams developed a cough at 0815 hours. Deep. Wet. His lungs were irritated from chemical fumes. He coughed every 30 seconds. Could not stop. Could not rest. Just coughed and kept working. Kowalski's vision blurred at 0830 hours. Exhaustion. Stress. Chemical exposure. He closed his eyes. Counted to 10. Opened them. Vision still blurred. Ignored it. Kept calculating ratios. Kept checking mixtures. Kept supervising the work. By 0845 hours, they had mixed 35 batches. 1925 gallons. Enough for 9 tanks at 200 gallons per tank. 5 more batches to mix. 45 minutes remaining. The sky outside was getting lighter. Dawn came at approximately 0730 hours in December in Belgium. The sun was not visible through overcast clouds, but the darkness was changing to grey. Morning was approaching. German attacks came in the morning. They needed tanks operational before the Germans attacked. Final 5 batches were mixed by 0915 hours. 2200 gallons total. Kowalski checked each batch. Looked for separation. Looked for precipitation. Looked for anything wrong. The mixtures appeared homogeneous. Clear liquid. Slight green tint from the ethylene glycol. No visible problems. But visible inspection was not laboratory. Testing. He could not measure actual freezing point. Could not test for vapor lock tendency. Could not measure corrosion rates. Could only trust the chemistry. Trust the calculations. Trust that molecules behaved according to theory. 90% confident, 10% terrified. Start filling tanks. Kowalski ordered. They moved the mixing tanks to the frozen Shermans. 11 tanks needed coolant. The first step was draining the frozen standard coolant. That meant removing the solid ice that had formed inside the cooling systems. The ice came out in chunks, solid green blocks of frozen ethylene glycol and water. The blocks had expanded enough to crack engine blocks in 6 tanks. In 5 tanks, the engine blocks had survived. Barely. Hairline cracks were visible but had not propagated through the entire structure. Those 5 tanks might still work. Might. They filled the first tank at 0900 hours. 200 gallons of modified coolant pumped into the cooling system. Kowalski checked for leaks. Checked for proper flow. The coolant moved through the system smoothly. Viscosity seemed acceptable despite the glycerol content. "Start the engine," Kowalski told Martinez. Martinez climbed into the Sherman. Cold interior. Frost on every metal surface. He pressed the starter button. The electric motor cranked. The engine turned over once, twice, 3 times, caught, fired. The Continental R975 engine rumbled to life. 500 horsepower, 9 cylinders, 32,000 pounds of torque. The engine ran rough for 10 seconds, then smoothed out. Temperature gauge began climbing. 50 degrees Celsius, 60 degrees, 70, 80. Stabilized at 88 degrees, normal operating temperature. No vapor lock, no overheating, no visible problems. Martinez let the engine run for 5 minutes. Temperature remained stable at 87 to 90 degrees. Coolant circulated properly. No leaks, no steam, no warning indicators. "It works," Martinez said. 1 tank operational. 10 more to fill. 25 minutes remaining before 09:30 hours. They worked faster. Filled the second tank by 09:12 hours. Started the engine. Worked normally. Third tank by 09:22 hours. Engine started. Temperature normal. Fourth tank by 09:31 hours. Outside, artillery started firing. German guns. Morning bombardment. The attack was beginning. 5th tank filled by 09:40 hours. 6th by 09:48. 7th by 09:55. They were working through German artillery impacts. Shells landing 200 yards away. 300 yards. The maintenance tent shook with each explosion. 8th tank filled at 10:03 hours. 9th at 10:11. 10th at 10:18. 11th at 10:26 hours. 11 Sherman tanks with unauthorized coolant. 11 engines running on chemistry that violated every army specification. 11 tanks ready for combat. Kowalski stood in the maintenance tent, surrounded by empty mixing containers and exhausted mechanics. His hands were shaking. His vision was still blurred. His head pounded. But 11 tanks were operational. Major Hastings entered the tent at 10:30 hours. "The Germans are attacking. I need every operational tank on the line now." 11 tanks ready, sir," Kowalski said. "Coolant modification complete." Hastings looked at the 11 running Shermans, looked at Kowalski's exhausted face. "If this works, I owe you my career. If it fails, we both face court-martial." "Yes, sir. Good enough. Mount up. We find out now if your chemistry beats their panzers." At 10:32 hours on December 19th, 1944, 11 Sherman tanks with modified coolant rolled toward defensive positions. Temperature, -19 degrees Celsius. German attack. In progress. The test was beginning. At 10:37 hours on December 19th, 1944, 11 Sherman tanks took defensive positions along a 3-mile sector of the Bastogne perimeter. Temperature, -19 degrees Celsius. Wind, 15 kilometers per hour from the northwest. Visibility, 800 meters through snow and fog. German armor, approaching from the northeast. Lieutenant James Reardon commanded the lead tank, 24 years old. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 7 months in Europe, 12 combat engagements. He positioned his Sherman hull down behind a snow-covered embankment. The engine idled smoothly. Temperature gauge read 89 degrees Celsius. Normal. The coolant modification had been installed 90 minutes earlier. Riordan did not understand the chemistry, did not care about the chemistry, cared that his tank was running when 6 others in his company were frozen solid. At 10:42 hours, German artillery stopped firing. Standard pattern. Bombardment ended. Armour advanced. Riordan raised his binoculars. Scanned the tree line 1,000 meters northeast. Movement. Grey shapes emerging from fog. Panzer IV tanks. He counted 12. Behind them, approximately 20 infantry soldiers in winter camouflage. Riordan keyed his radio. Hostile armour. 12 panzers. Range 1,000 meters. Northeast tree line. Major Hastings' voice crackled through the radio from battalion command post. All tanks hold position. Wait for range to close. Fire on my command. The German tanks advanced in 2 columns, 6 tanks per column, standard Wehrmacht assault formation. They moved slowly through deep snow, approximately 8 kilometers per hour. Turrets traversed left and right. Searching for targets. They had not yet spotted the hull-down American Shermans. Range, 900 meters, 800 meters, 700 meters. At 650 meters, the lead German tank fired, high explosive round. Impacted 30 meters short of Riordan's position. Snow and frozen earth erupted upward. The Germans had spotted them. All tanks, Hastings, ordered. Fire at will. Riordan gave the command. Gunner. Tank. 12 o'clock. 600 meters. His gunner, Corporal Anthony Russo, centered the sight picture. The Panzer IV filled the scope. Russo pressed the trigger. The 75mm gun fired. Recoil rocked the Sherman. The round flew downrange. 2 seconds of flight time. Impact. The armor-piercing shell hit the Panzer's frontal glacis plate. Penetrated. The German tank exploded from internal ammunition detonation. Turret separated from hull, flew 6 meters into the air, crashed into snow. 11 Shermans fired simultaneously. 11 muzzle flashes along the American defensive line. German tanks started exploding. 1, 2, 3, 4. The German advance disintegrated. Surviving panzers reversed direction. Retreated toward the tree line. American tanks fired again. 2 more German tanks destroyed. 6 Panzer IVs dead in 90 seconds. The remaining German tanks reached the tree line, disappeared into fog. Infantry scattered. The attack was over. First German probe repulsed. 0 American tanks damaged. But the real test was not the combat. The real test was whether the engines kept running. Riordan checked his temperature gauge. Still 89 degrees Celsius. Stable. No overheating. No vapor lock. The modified coolant was working. He checked fuel. Still 70%. Checked ammunition. Still 43 rounds remaining. His tank was fully operational. He looked left and right at the other Shermans in his platoon. All 11 tanks were still running. Engines idling smoothly. No smoke, no steam, no problems visible. The engagement had lasted 15 minutes. Temperature outside had dropped to minus 20 degrees Celsius during the fight. The standard army coolant would have been forming ice crystals by now, would have been beginning the freezing process that led to cracked engine blocks. But Kowalski's modified mixture remained liquid, remained functional. At 1300 hours, temperature dropped to minus 21 degrees Celsius. At 1600 hours, minus 23 degrees. At 1900 hours, minus 25 degrees. The coldest day of December, the coldest day of the war in Belgium, all 11 tanks remained operational. 0 cooling system failures, 0 frozen engines, 0 cracked blocks. That night, temperature dropped to minus 27 degrees Celsius. The modified coolant remained liquid. Morning of December 20th, 0600 hours. All 11 engines started immediately. First turn of the starter motor. No hesitation, no problems. Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski inspected each tank at 0700 hours, December 20th. Checked coolant levels. Checked for leaks. Checked temperature readings. Every system was functioning normally. The chemistry was working, but other battalions were not as fortunate. 1st Battalion, 3rd Armoured Division, operated 20 kilometers south of Bastogne. They used standard army coolant. On the night of December 19th, they lost 9 tanks to freezing. Engine blocks cracked, tanks immobilized. By the morning of December 20th, 1st Battalion had only 7 operational Shermans remaining from an original strength of 28 tanks. 3rd Battalion, operating 15 kilometers north, lost 8 tanks the same night. Same problem, standard coolant, minus 27-degree temperatures. Ice. Destruction. At 0900 hours, December 20th, Colonel James Abrams, commanding officer 3rd Armoured Division, visited 2nd Battalion command post, 52 years old. Regular army since 1914, 30 years of service. He had commanded armour in North Africa, Sicily, France. Never seen tank losses like this from weather. He found Major Hastings reviewing defensive positions. "Major, I need an explanation. 1st and 3rd Battalions lost 17 tanks to freezing last night. You lost 0. How?" Hastings looked at him. "We modified the coolant, sir." "Modified it how?" Technical Sergeant Kowalski reformulated the mixture. Added methanol, glycerol, salt, lowered freezing point to minus 30 degrees. "It works." Abrams stared. "You modified Army specification coolant without authorization?" "Yes, sir. The alternative was losing all our tanks by December 22nd. Sergeant Kowalski is a chemist, worked at Standard Oil before the war. He knows coolant formulation. His formula works. Where is this sergeant?" They found Kowalski in the maintenance tent at 0930 hours. He was checking coolant samples, testing for separation, looking for any sign of mixture instability. Colonel Abrams entered. Kowalski came to attention. "At ease, Sergeant," Abrams said. "Explain your coolant modification." Kowalski explained the chemistry, explained freezing point depression, explained the component ratios, explained why the standard mixture failed and why his mixture worked, spoke for 8 minutes, used technical terminology, molecular weights, colligative properties, eutectic points. Abrams understood approximately 40% of the explanation, but he understood results, understood that 2nd Battalion had 11 operational tanks, while other battalions were losing equipment every night. "Can you make enough for the entire division?" Abrams asked. Kowalski calculated mentally. "Division has approximately 41 operational tanks remaining across all battalions. 200 gallons per tank. 8,200 gallons needed. I have materials for approximately 3,000 more gallons. Need additional methanol, additional glycerol." "What do you need specifically?" 20 more drums of methanol fuel additive. 60 more gallons of pharmaceutical glycerol. 100 more pounds of salt. 8 hours of mixing time. 12 mechanics to help with labor. Abrams made his decision immediately. "You will have everything you need within 2 hours. Strip methanol from ATME, every truck in the division if necessary. Requisition glycerol from every field hospital within 20 kilometers. I want every operational tank in 3rd Armoured running your coolant mixture by midnight tonight." "Yes, sir." At 10 to 100 hours December 20th, Kowalski began training 6 additional mechanics on the mixing procedure, showed them the ratios, explained the process, emphasized precision. They set up 3 mixing stations in different locations across the division maintenance area. Each station could produce approximately 100 gallons per hour. By 1200 hours, production was running. 3 teams mixing coolant simultaneously. Kowalski supervised, checked ratios, tested samples, ensured consistency across all batches. By 2000 hours December 20th, they had produced 8,400 gallons of modified coolant. Slightly more than required, better to have excess than shortage. Mechanics worked through the night filling tanks, 41 Shermans, 200 gallons each, draining frozen standard coolant, replacing with modified mixture. Starting engines. Testing operation. By midnight, December 20th, 41 tanks were converted. At 0600 hours December 21st, all 41 engines started normally despite -26-degree temperature. The next 48 hours would prove whether Kowalski's formula could sustain extended combat operations. December 21st. German forces launched coordinated attacks against 3rd Armoured positions. 3 separate engagements. Morning attack at 0900 hours. Afternoon attack at 1400 hours. Evening attack at 1800 hours. Each engagement lasted between 20 minutes and 1 hour. American tanks maneuvered, fired, repositioned. Engines running continuously in -20 to -28-degree temperatures. 0 cooling system failures. 0 frozen engines. 0 overheating incidents. 0 vapor lock problems. The modified coolant performed exactly as Kowalski's calculations predicted. December 22nd. 4 more engagements. Temperatures ranging from -18 degrees to -26 degrees. 72 continuous hours of temperatures below -15 degrees. Standard Army coolant would have frozen solid, would have cracked engine blocks, would have immobilized the entire battalion, but Kowalski's mixture remained liquid, remained functional. Tanks kept running. Other divisions were not as successful. 4th Armoured Division, operating 30 kilometers south of Bastogne, lost 32 tanks to cooling system failures between December 19th and December 22nd. 4th Armoured used standard coolant. Had no chemist who understood reformulation. Had no technical sergeant Raymond Kowalski. 9th Armoured Division, operating 40 kilometers north, lost 28 tanks to freezing in the same period. Same problem. Standard specifications. Inadequate chemistry. Catastrophic equipment losses. 3rd Armoured Division lost 0 tanks to cooling system failures after implementing Kowalski's modification. 0. Statistical anomaly. The only division in the European theatre maintaining full operational readiness despite record cold temperatures, German intelligence noticed. Captured Wehrmacht radio intercepts from December 22nd included message from German reconnaissance. American 3rd Armoured Division maintains unusual operational readiness despite extreme cold weather conditions. Enemy tank mobility, unaffected by temperature. Recommend avoiding direct engagement with 3rd Armoured Sector. Seek easier targets. The German army was avoiding 3rd Armoured. Avoiding them because their tanks still worked when everyone else's tanks were freezing. Avoiding them because one sergeant mixed the right chemicals in the right ratios. Strategic impact was measurable. Bastogne defensive line held. German advance stalled at 3rd Armoured positions. Wehrmacht could not exploit the weather advantage. Could not push through frozen American armor because American armor was not frozen. By December 23rd, German offensive momentum was broken. Patton's 3rd Army was approaching from the south. Allied air support was returning as weather cleared. The Battle of the Bulge was turning. Bastogne would not fall. At 1400 hours, December 21st, Captain Robert Thornton arrived at 3rd Armoured Division headquarters. 36 years old. Army Engineering Corps. Mechanical engineer from MIT. His job was equipment inspection. His job was ensuring field maintenance followed Army specifications. His job was enforcing regulations. He inspected several Shermans from 2nd Battalion, drew coolant samples, tested composition using field chemical kit. The results were wrong. The coolant was not standard mixture, not 50% ethylene glycol, 50% water. The samples contained methanol, contained glycerol, contained salt, unauthorized compounds. Thornton found Major Hastings at 1500 hours. Major, your tanks are using unauthorized coolant mixture. Correct, Hastings said. Modified coolant. Works better than standard specifications. Who authorized this modification? I did. You do not have authority to modify Army specification coolant. These modifications violate Field Manual 3-20. Untested coolant mixtures could damage engines. Risk equipment worth $1.6 million. This is serious violation of regulations. Hastings looked at him. Captain, this modification kept 41 tanks operational for 72 hours in the coldest weather on record. Standard coolant would have frozen, would have cracked engine blocks, would have immobilized this division. My tanks work because we modified the coolant. Results are irrelevant to regulatory compliance, Thornton said. Unauthorized modifications are violations regardless of outcome. I need to know who formulated this mixture. That individual faces potential court-martial. Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski formulated it. Where is he? Maintenance tent. But understand something, Captain. Sergeant Kowalski saved this battalion, saved this division. His chemistry kept us in the fight. You want to court-martial him for that? I want to enforce regulations. Bring me to this sergeant. They found Kowalski at 15:30 hours. He was checking coolant levels in a Sherman that had just returned from patrol. His hands were covered in grease. He saw Hastings approaching with an engineering corps officer. Knew immediately what was happening. Thornton examined him. Enlisted man, dirty coveralls, grease under fingernails. This was the chemist who violated regulations? Sergeant, you formulated unauthorized coolant mixture for this division? Yes, sir. You understand this violates Army specifications? Yes, sir. You understand using untested chemical compounds in plan. Critical systems risks equipment damage? The mixture is tested, sir. I formulated similar coolants for 3 years at Standard Oil. The chemistry is sound. The results prove it works. You are not authorized to determine what works. Engineers at Army Chemical Warfare Service determine specifications. Field mechanics follow those specifications. You violated that chain. I am ordering immediate removal of all unauthorized coolant from every tank in 3rd Armored Division. Replace with standard mixture immediately. Hastings stepped forward. We are in active combat. My tanks are operational. I refuse that order. You refuse direct order from Engineering Corps? I refuse order that will immobilize my battalion in the middle of a battle. Sergeant Kowalski's coolant works. Standard coolant freezes. Simple choice. Thornton's face was red. This is not over. I am filing formal report with Engineering Command. There will be investigation. There will be consequences. Unauthorized. Modifications cannot be tolerated regardless of circumstances. He left. Hastings looked at Kowalski. That went well. Court-martial? Kowalski asked. Probably. But we are not dead. That counts for something. At 1600 hours, December 21st, 1944, Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski faced potential court-martial for saving 41 tanks, 250 soldiers, and the defensive line at Bastogne. The modified coolant worked. The regulations said it should not exist. One of those would have to change. At 0800 hours on December 28, 1944, Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski stood at attention in 3rd Army Headquarters, Luxembourg City. The Battle of the Bulge was turning in Allied favor. German offensive momentum was broken. Bastogne still held. American counterattacks were pushing Wehrmacht forces back toward Germany. But Kowalski was not thinking about strategic victory. He was thinking about the court-martial investigation. Captain Robert Thornton sat behind a desk reviewing documents. Engineering Corps investigation file. Formal complaint regarding unauthorized coolant modifications. Evidence of regulatory violations. Recommendation for charges. Thornton looked up. Sergeant Kowalski, you are accused of violating Army maintenance regulations. Specifically, unauthorized modification of coolant specifications in violation of Field Manual 3-20, Section 4, Paragraph 12. You used unapproved chemical compounds in critical cooling systems. You risked equipment damage worth approximately $1.6 million 41 Sherman tanks at approximately $40,000 per tank. How do you respond? Guilty, sir, Kowalski said. I modified the coolant without authorization, used methanol, glycerol, sodium chloride, in ratios not specified in technical manuals. The modifications violated regulations. You admit guilt? Yes, sir. But I would do it. Again. Standard coolant was freezing, cracking engine blocks, destroying tanks. My modification prevented that destruction. Results speak for themselves. Thornton shuffled papers. Results are not the issue. Compliance is the issue. You are not authorized to determine coolant specifications. Engineers at Army Chemical Warfare Service establish specifications through rigorous testing. Field mechanics implement those specifications. You circumvented that process. The specifications were wrong, sir. They claimed -12-degree freeze protection. Actual performance was -11 degrees in field conditions. Weather was -27 degrees. The specifications failed. My formula worked to -32 degrees. Chemistry does not care about regulations. But Army does care about regulations, Sergeant. Regulations exist to prevent unauthorized modifications that could cause catastrophic equipment failure. What if your mixture had caused vapor lock? What if engines overheated in combat? What if cooling systems corroded and failed during critical engagements? The consequences could have been worse than freezing. But they were not worse, sir. 41 tanks operated for 96 continuous hours in extreme cold. 0 cooling system failures. 0 engine damage. 0 vapor lock incidents. The formula worked exactly as calculated. Thornton leaned back. You are a sergeant with 2 years of community college education. You are not a chemical engineer. You are not authorized to conduct chemistry experiments on Army equipment during combat operations. Yet you did exactly that. Why should I not recommend court-martial? Before Kowalski could answer, the door opened. Major Frank Hastings entered. Behind him, Colonel James Abrams, both in full uniform, both carrying documents. Hastings spoke first. Permission to submit evidence, sir. Thornton frowned. This is not formal hearing. This is preliminary investigation. Evidence is relevant to Fodin's charges, Hastings said. You claim Sergeant Kowalski risked equipment. I have evidence of results. Abrams placed a folder on Thornton's desk. Combat Operations Report. 2nd Battalion. 3rd Armored Division. December 19th through December 28th. 11 tanks using modified coolant. 18 combat engagements. Temperatures ranging -18 to -28 degrees Celsius. Total cooling system failures, 0. Total engine damage, 0. Total combat effectiveness, 100%. Thornton opened the folder. Read the statistics. His expression did not change. Now compare with other units, Abrams continued. He placed another folder. 4th Armored Division, standard coolant, same time period, same weather conditions. Cooling system failures, 68 tanks, 47% of division strength. 9th Armored Division. 74 tanks lost to freezing, 53% of division strength. 3rd Armored Division, using Sergeant Kowalski's modification. 0 tanks lost to freezing, 0%. Thornton studied the numbers. The statistics were undeniable. 3rd Armored maintained operational readiness, while other divisions lost half their armor to cold weather. Additional evidence, Hastings said. He placed a third folder. Casualty estimates. Operations research analysis. Immobilized tanks during German attack result in crew casualties. 4th Armored lost 68 tanks to freezing. Estimated 170 casualties when those immobilized tanks were overrun during subsequent German attacks. 9th Armored. Estimated 200 casualties. 3rd Armored. 0 casualties from immobilized tanks. Sergeant Kowalski's modification prevented approximately 250 American casualties. Thornton read slowly. The casualty statistics were projections, not confirmed kills. But the logic was sound. Immobilized tank equals dead crew during enemy attack. 3rd Armored avoided immobilization, therefore avoided casualties. Strategic impact, Abrams added. 3rd Armored held 15-mile defensive sector throughout entire German offensive. Bastogne defensive line held. Wehrmacht advance stalled. German offensive failed. Contributing factors include air support, artillery, infantry, but also include operational armor. 3rd Armored maintained armor strength because of modified coolant. Other divisions lost 50% armor strength. If 3rd Armored had lost 50% strength, defensive line might have collapsed. Bastogne might have fallen. Estimated casualties from Bastogne falling, 10,000 Allied soldiers. Thornton looked at Kowalski. You calculated all this before mixing the coolant? No, sir. I calculated freezing point depression, calculated mixture ratios, calculated that modified coolant would work to minus 32 degrees. The strategic implications were beyond my authority. I just wanted tanks to run. But you knew the coolant violated regulations? Yes, sir. Also knew that following regulations meant losing all operational armor by December 22nd. Chose to violate regulations, chose to keep tanks running, chose to save lives. Thornton was silent for 30 seconds. Looked at the casualty statistics, looked at the combat effectiveness reports, looked at Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski standing at attention. This investigation is complicated, Thornton finally said. Technically, you violated regulations. Legally, that violation warrants charges. But practically, your violation saved equipment and lives. I need guidance from higher command. No guidance needed, a new voice said. General George Patton entered the room. Commander, 3rd Army, 60 years old, most aggressive American general in Europe, known for profanity, swagger, and winning battles. He looked at Kowalski, looked at Thornton. Captain, are you seriously considering court-martial for a sergeant who saved 250 casualties? Sir, regulations require winning wars, Patton interrupted. Sergeant Kowalski broke regulations to save his battalion. I want more soldiers who think like that. Not fewer. The regulations were wrong. He was right. Simple. But unauthorized modifications set dangerous precedent. Know what sets dangerous precedent? Losing battles because we follow stupid specifications written by engineers who never saw combat. Kowalski saw the problem, fixed the problem, saved lives. That is exactly what good sergeants do. Thornton looked uncomfortable. General, I must file report. Engineering command requires, file whatever report you want, Patton said. Recommend whatever charges you want. I will personally intervene. Sergeant Kowalski will face no charges. Furthermore, I am directing Army Chemical Warfare Service to analyze his coolant formula and revise field manual specifications accordingly. If his chemistry works better than our specifications, we change our specifications. Clear? Yes, sir. Patton looked at Kowalski. Sergeant, return to your unit. Keep fixing tanks. Keep winning battles. That is all. Yes, sir. At 10 to 100 hours, December 28th, 1944, all charges against Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski were dropped. Official reason. Actions taken under combat necessity demonstrate sound engineering judgment. No evidence of equipment damage. Results confirm modification effectiveness. Kowalski returned to maintenance duty. No court-martial, no reprimand, no recognition, just returned to work. Army Chemical Warfare Service received orders on January 5, 1945. Analyze Kowalski coolant modification. Conduct laboratory testing. Determine if field modification should become official specification. Testing took 6 weeks. Engineers at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland mixed Kowalski's formula, tested freezing point, tested viscosity, tested corrosion rates, tested engine compatibility, ran durability tests, 100 hours continuous operation at combat temperatures. Results confirmed everything Kowalski calculated. Freezing point minus 32 degrees Celsius. No vapor lock at operating temperatures. Acceptable viscosity for pump circulation. Corrosion within acceptable limits for combat duration. Long-term use required annual coolant flushing due to salt content, but short-term combat effectiveness was excellent. On March 15, 1945, Army published Field Manual 3-20, Amendment 14. Cold weather coolant modification for extended winter operations. The amendment authorized methanol-glycerol salt mixture for temperatures below -15 degrees Celsius. Component ratios: 35% ethylene glycol, 28% methanol, 15% glycerol, 20% water, 2% sodium chloride solution. Exact ratios Kowalski calculated. No attribution to Kowalski anywhere in the manual. Just, developed through field experience during winter operations, December 1944. The modification became standard procedure. Every maintenance depot received instructions. Every cold weather operation used the formula. Korea, 1950. Winter of 1950-51. United Nations forces faced -35-degree temperatures at Chosin Reservoir. Standard coolant failed. Mechanics referenced Field Manual 3-20, Amendment 14. Mixed the modified coolant. Tanks kept running. Nobody knew the formula came from a sergeant in Belgium 7 years earlier. Kowalski never received military recognition for the innovation. No medal, no commendation, no official acknowledgement. He received Bronze Star in April 1945 for meritorious service in maintenance operations. Generic award, given to thousands of mechanics. Citation did not mention coolant modification, did not mention chemistry, did not mention saving 250 casualties. He was discharged September 19, 45. Rank, Technical Sergeant. Service, 3 years, 8 months. Returned to Cleveland, Ohio. Returned to Standard Oil Refinery. Same company. Different position. They hired him as senior chemical engineer in the coolant division. His job, formulating automotive and industrial coolants. Same work he did before the war. Same chemistry. No combat. No frozen tanks. No court-martial threats. He worked at Standard Oil for 28 years. 1945 to 1973. Retired at age 61. Married Helen Novak in 1947. 3 children, 5 grandchildren. Normal civilian life. Never discussed the war. Never mentioned Bastogne. Never mentioned the coolant modification that saved a battalion. One person remembered. Major Frank Hastings, promoted to colonel, retired 1962, visited Kowalski every December 19 from 1946 through 1988, same day, every year. Anniversary of the coolant modification. Hastings would drive from his home in Maryland to Cleveland. Would sit in Kowalski's living room. Would say the same thing. Thank you for saving my battalion. Kowalski's response never changed. Just did what needed doing. Hastings kept a small bottle of the modified coolant on his desk for 33 years. Green liquid in a glass bottle. Label written in Hastings' handwriting, December 19, 1944. The formula that saved Bastogne. When Hastings died in 1988, his family found the bottle, asked what it was. His widow explained, "Coolant mixture from the war." They did not understand. Threw it away. Raymond Kowalski died April 12, 1992, age 79. Cleveland Clinic Hospital, heart failure. His obituary in the Cleveland Plain Dealer mentioned his career at Standard Oil, mentioned his army service in Europe during World War II, mentioned his wife, children, grandchildren. One sentence mentioned his technical expertise in coolant chemistry. No mention of Bastogne. No mention of 41 tanks. No mention of 250 lives saved. No mention of Field Manual 3-20, Amendment 14. No mention that his formula became standard U.S. Army specification used for 50 years. His funeral was small. Family. Friends. Co-workers from Standard Oil. Nobody from the Army. Nobody from 3rd Armored Division. Nobody who knew what he did in December 1944. but modern U.S. Army still uses cold-weather coolant modifications for extreme operations. Still references chemical principles Kowalski applied. Still trains mechanics on mixture ratios. Still benefits from chemistry experiment conducted in frozen Belgian maintenance tent 78 years ago. Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski saved a battalion with 6 hours of chemistry, prevented 250 casualties, held Bastogne, changed army specifications, forever. Received no recognition, asked for no recognition, just wanted tanks to work. Sometimes the most important innovations come from sergeants with chemistry knowledge. Sometimes violations of regulations save more lives than following procedures. Sometimes the men who change history never get their names in the reports. Bastogne held. Not just because of generals or strategy, because one mechanic understood molecules better than he understood metals, because one man mixed the right chemicals in the right ratios when everyone else said it was impossible. That is how wars are actually won.